Shabbat Shalom, everyone. To those of us joining virtually and to those of us in our tent who are a bit bundled up this morning, I want to briefly just reflect on two stories in the news that have sort of consumed news media this week. Both disturbing for different reasons. The first, less than a week ago on April 11th, 20-year-old Daunte Wright was fatally shot by police officer Kim Potter in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. She claimed in her report that she meant to use her taser and fired her firearm instead. Regardless of reasoning, it was another case of a law enforcement officer using deadly force against a young man of color. And for what reason? He was initially pulled over, we're told, because he had an expired registration, like so many in Minnesota and across the country because of the backlogs during this pandemic, and was asked to get out of his car because he had an air freshener hanging from his rear view mirror, which apparently is illegal in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. I have to say, that's something that I hang from the rear view mirror of my minivan. You sort of have to when you have kids making a mess in your car. But I'm a white man who's never been pulled over because of an air freshener. Daunte Wright called his mother as he was bleeding to death, knowing that this was the end. And he died only 10 miles from where Derek Chauvin was on trial for the murder of George Floyd. Late Thursday night, there was also a report of the most recent mass shooting in this country, that a disgruntled former employee of FedEx walked into a FedEx facility in Indianapolis, and the gunman opened fire, murdering 8, ranging in age from 19 to 56, before turning the gun on himself and taking his own life. 2 of the most recent and disturbing cases of gun violence, one a mass shooting, another example of police brutality, all resulting in precious lives taken from this world far too soon. You know, I feel like, and it may be my own privilege, which I acknowledge, that the accounts of mass shootings, the accounts of police-involved shootings of men of color have decreased during this pandemic. I thought, wow, maybe a silver lining of this pandemic is a reduction of gun violence, until I did research and saw an increase of gun violence in domestic disputes. People are home more. It ended violently for all too many. And so maybe it was just the number of mass shootings and the number of racially charged police shootings were reported less by law enforcement, by news media and news outlets. Thinking maybe we were grappling with one plague, the plague of COVID-19, and other plagues took a back seat. A plague which has taken hundreds of thousands of lives in this country. Maybe I thought it temporarily halted another plague. And now, the stream of shootings happening in recent days, is that an example of our country opening back up? People feeling safer and healthier, just in some ways as we have begun to open up for our outdoor tent service. Is it that the more we open back up as a country, the more we return to the plague of gun violence. You know, we talk about this yearning to return to normal. I use that language all the time. I can't wait for life to get back to normal. I had to check my own privilege because I came to understand what normal meant for me is not normal for others. Not normal for Daunte Wright. Certainly not normal for essential workers who are forced to come to work in person, putting their health at risk in close confines and close contact with other coworkers, only to die by the bullet. Our Torah reading this morning, the double portion of Tazria-Metzora, talks about this strange plague of tzara'at, this skin ailment, so contagious that one is to quarantine outside the camp if they're exposed to it, mirrors much of what we've dealt with this past year. Except, well, the Torah talks about this skin ailment. Our rabbis explain that it's not a physical illness, but rather a spiritual impurity. And the Torah mentions that maybe bodily emission, maybe come into contact with the dead, all these examples of what may cause tzara'at. Our rabbis are quick to say other reasons cause tzara'at, linking it to the case when Miriam gets tzara'at for speaking ill will about another. And that's why they conclude that it is not a physical illness, but a spiritual one. One of the most fascinating aspects, though, of our Torah reading is what we're required to do to address the Metzora, the one who suffers from this spiritual impurity. The person who's plagued, who remains outside the camp, ensuring that they're not alone. The priest is told to go to where they are outside the camp to check on them. The communal leader is not meant to be inside the camp where everybody is healthy, where everybody is safe, but is meant to sit with the victim, with the one who is in pain and suffering, partially to perform a ritual on the individual, to spiritually purify them again so that they go from tameh to tahor. But I believe that the real lesson is that those who are victims of a plague are who we remain with. Those who are in pain and suffering are who we remain with, rather than those who are healthy, those who are safe, those who are privileged. We can't forget when I talk about a return to normalcy, than what normal means for most people. For young men and women of color, Daunte Wright, all of 20 years old, we talk about, all right, you're 18, you're an adult. He was a child. Normal means being scared of law enforcement. For Black parents, normal means having the talk with your children about how to act around law enforcement. For so many of our children who haven't gone to in-person school in so long, we forget about what school actually was like in person when these large groups were in large gathering in large spaces. School was lockdown drills because of fear of mass shootings like that took place at the FedEx facility in Indianapolis. We forget that the first thing that we did here, when we talked about returning to in-person gatherings, was have a conversation about what security was like so that we can gather in person. That is really what normal means. That's the burden that we hold on to. I'm not sure that's the normal that we yearn for, that we want to hold on to either. So my prayer, as we continue to talk about this light at the end of the tunnel, as the weather gets warmer, as we feel more comfortable being outside together, even bundled up on a morning like this, as vaccination rates increase, and we see, God willing, soon, the end of one plague, may we commit to not returning to others. May we act like the priest. May we make sure that no one feels alone or isolated or ignored as victims of the plague of racial injustice, of the plague of police brutality, of the plague of gun violence, just because in this moment it doesn't impact us, just because of the privilege of some, it may not impact us directly, because it does. It all does. For when we ignore it, when we don't address it, it makes us all as a community spiritually impure. The fact that the one who performed the ritual to sit with those who were the Metzora was the communal leader, and then would return back to the campsites, means that our thoughts, our actions are about how to heal, how to solve one crisis, rather than just putting it in the back of our minds and saying it doesn't bother us, it doesn't affect us, it doesn't impact us. Our job is to act like the priest and to acknowledge there's nothing normal about the way life was for so many before this pandemic. And God willing, as this pandemic concludes soon, we work to build a world that is a lot more normal and nothing like what reality was like before. Shabbat Shalom.